Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 9 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Vegas Golden Knights, in which the Sharks have lost 4-2. And this is a pretty disappointing loss for a couple of reasons. The first one is that, of course, it comes at the hands of the Vegas Golden Knights, one of the Sharks' biggest rivals, which is going to be disappointing for fans of the team who want the Sharks to actually do well and win games, and it'll likely also come somewhat disappointingly even to the fans that want to lose games, because of course even those fans realize that the Sharks can't go 0-82 in a season. That's just literally never going to happen. The Sharks have to win some games, and you'd much rather those wins come against a team like the Golden Knights compared to a team like the New York Rangers. So it's disappointing that the Sharks do not actually manage to get the win here tonight. They were the team that knocked the Golden Knights, or came, pretty much put the final nail in the coffin of the Golden Knights' playoff dreams last year, and now they're back here onto the losing side of things. The other reason that this was somewhat disappointing of a loss is because the Sharks actually had control of this game. They held a lead going into the third period of this one, and that is one of the best positions to be in hockey. You'll see even some of the best teams in the league, when holding a lead going into the third period, may just never lose a game in a particular season, and if they do lose, it usually will come in overtime or the shootout. For the San Jose Sharks here tonight, not only do they lose this game with the 2-1 lead going into the third period, but they lost it in regulation, so they won't even manage a singular point from it. And what is the very interesting thing about this game is that from the first 5 games of the season, the San Jose Sharks lost each and every one of them, and it was very easy to pinpoint exactly where things went wrong for the San Jose Sharks, and that was usually the second period. They'd frequently come out with pretty solid first periods, maybe even score a goal or two, but in the second period, everything would collapse. They'd give up at least a goal, sometimes 2 or even 3 of them, and the game would just run away from them. But in the past couple of games, the Sharks have played significantly better in the second period, but that has for whatever reason come with their first period really suffering alongside of it. And so here tonight, the San Jose Sharks got kind of run over by the Golden Knights in that first period, and were decently lucky to escape it just down a single goal from Phil Kessel, who played his 990th straight NHL game to claim the Iron Man title streak from Keith Yandle. In the second period, the Sharks would play that strong period. Like I mentioned, they'd get goals from both Nico Sturm and Matt Nieto. Once again, it is the Sharks' bottom 6 who are scoring all of their goals and doing all of their offense for them. You could technically argue that Nieto did get the breakaway pass, which is a very nice breakaway pass from Tomas Hertl, but technically it is still a fourth line forward scoring this goal. Anyhow, the Sharks held the lead going into that third period, but then the game just gets completely flipped on its head. The Golden Knights, who are just generally a very good team and definitely better than the San Jose Sharks, managed to just wake up in this final 20 minutes, get goals from Theodore, Carlson, and Stone, and like I said, take the win in regulation and leave the Sharks with nothing. Now, some people might look at how this game went and say, well, that 20-minute middle frame there in the second period where the Sharks were much better than the Golden Knights, why couldn't they just do that for 60 minutes? And this is a feeling that every single fan around the league has at some point. They'll watch their team play a good 20 minutes, a good 40 minutes, and they'll say, well, why can't we do that over a full 60 minutes? But it's very important to remember that this is not a game that is played against robots, where if you just reach a certain level of play, you're guaranteed to win. Every single game has 2 sides of it, and so it is very easy to say, well, the Sharks played well in the second period and they played poorly in the first period, but it's also important to remember that on the other side of the coin, it was the Golden Knights who played poorly in the second and who played well in the first period. And so it's very difficult to exactly pinpoint how much was it that one team played well compared to the other team playing poorly. Obviously, it's some sort of combination of that, but sometimes it is sort of more in one direction than the other. It's, very similar to, let's say, the third period against the Rangers a few games ago, where they held the Rangers to just a couple of shots. Was that because the Sharks were just this unstoppable force that the Rangers had zero answer to? Or was it because the Rangers themselves just played horribly poorly and the Sharks didn't really have to put in that much effort to dominate the Rangers in that third period? It can be difficult to say, so it's not as easy to just say, well, if the Sharks played like they did in the second period for every single period of every single game, they'd win the Stanley Cup, because of course there's always that opponent, there's always the other side of the coin that is going to be able to answer to what you do. Moving on to the forwards here, we of course have the first line of Hertl, Meier, and Barabanov, and you could just absolutely see the frustration of this line. Even though they are generating some decent chances, we saw Meier try and throw pretty much every possible puck that he ever touched in this game right on net to try and get his first goal of the game, but nothing would come of it. Technically, this line would contribute to one of the goals for the San Jose Sharks, like I mentioned earlier, the Matt Nieto one, but they obviously would have liked to score a goal for themselves. As I said, the frustration is very, very obvious on themselves. And the thing is that, when you get those interviews with all these players, they'll always say, well, at the end of the day, what matters is that we either got the 2 points or we didn't get the 2 points, right? Let's say a player who scores a hat trick, the media will interview him and they'll say, well, the hat trick is nice, but at the end of the day, I'm just happy we got the 2 points. But I imagine it is much easier to sort of be less frustrated with a loss when you're scoring a couple of points in said loss compared to doing absolutely nothing in the loss and losing it anyway. So last season, Meier, who had an exceptional year, 75 points, I believe 75 or 76 points, it was probably more easy to accept the losses that the Sharks were dealing with compared to now, where Meier does not even have yet a single goal this year in the first 9 games of the season. Definitely is going to be like double frustration on top of that. So we'll see if 1 point this line can break out of their slump. But the other line that is just not generating anything while also not having any goals is the second line, which is just absolutely disastrous. I mentioned that in the previous game against the Philadelphia Flyers, but it was a different feeling because the Sharks did win, and so it wasn't necessarily like a big deal. But here tonight, it continues to be this issue that the second line is just doing absolutely nothing. Even Logan Couture, who is supposed to be the sort of shining light on the second line, which he's usually playing with two kind of not second line wingers, he himself is not playing particularly well at all. He gets beat to the net on the Mark Stone goal. He just doesn't really commit to playing the defensive play in that particular situation, and as such, Mark Stone is able to easily get that goal. Cunnin does not belong in the top 6 on any NHL team. The same would go for Noah Gregor, and yet both of these players are here anyway because the Sharks, they do technically have better options, but they don't seem to want to go for those better options, and so right now, the Sharks are dealing with a top 6 where one of the lines are completely snake-bitten and so not contributing, and the other line is just generally bad. When it comes to the Sharks' bottom 6, like I mentioned many, many times in the past, this is the bottom 6. This is just generally the set of lines that are carrying the San Jose Sharks offense thus far this season. But the major problem with that is that was something that the Sharks could do last year when you had just 1 or 2 lines going, because that 1 or 2 lines was, Timo Meier, Tomas Hertl, and those are 2 players who absolutely can, single-handedly or duo-handedly or whatever, win a particular game. I love what Nico Sturm has been able to bring to this team through the first 9 games of this season, but the fact is that while he has been good, he's not good enough to, single-handedly win a game. He'll pot a goal here or there, and that's exactly what he's been doing thus far, leads the team in goals with his 4th of the season, but you're not expecting him to get that hat trick. You're not expecting him to control the pace of the game every single time he's on the ice. This was a solid game from Nico Sturm. He scored the goal. He spent more time in the offensive zone than in the defensive zone, but it wasn't something that I was like, wow, Nico Sturm, this guy is the future of the San Jose Sharks. He played well, but they need the rest of the team to also play well if sort of they want to capitalize on actually having finally a solid bottom 6. And the same situation does go for these last 3 players on the 4th line of Lorentz, Lindblom, and Matt Nieto. The 4th line I didn't think was as apparent as the 3rd line. Lindblom in particular has been a bit of a disappointment thus far this season compared to sort of, I was decently excited about him coming into the year, but has been one of the sort of not so great pickups from Mike Grier thus far. On the defensive side, speaking of not so great pickups, we have, of course, Matt Benning, who has won the title for the most confusing contract of all time. Honestly, the Sharks have some bad contracts on the team. Vlasic, Carlson, maybe even a couple of others that I won't get into at this point. But Matt Bennings is really the one that makes me sort of question, everything that I ever know about hockey, because it really just doesn't make sense from the literal moment it was signed. When it comes to Erik Karlsson, yeah, he probably wasn't worth the $11.5 million, but you did want him on the team. You do want to give him a contract that brings him back to San Jose, and if you had to go a bit expensive, it's whatever. Vlasic, at the time of him signing, you could say it was pretty ill-advised, but he was pretty good at the time. With Matt Benning, I honestly just can't think of any possible reason for why you would want him on a 4-year deal, even though it is relatively cheap. If the Sharks wanted to offer a 4-year contract to a player who doesn't actually deserve to be in the NHL, I would have volunteered to take that $1 million or so, and I wouldn't have even been a liability on the ice because I just wouldn't have played. But when it comes to Matt Benning, the Sharks now have him for 4 years, and he's just not a good defenseman. That's really just the bottom line. I'm not trying to be mean about this situation, but what's interesting is that coming into this year, which is, both a sad thing here for the San Jose Sharks and me being wrong, which was that I had said that Matt Benning might end up being the third best defenseman on the San Jose Sharks behind Karlsson and Ferraro because of how poorly Vlasic and Shemek had played last season and things of that nature. And yet now Vlasic and Shemek have actually had decent rebound years. Megna is playing pretty well. So besides, Scott Harrington, which I guess he might be better than him, Benning is actually the 6th best defenseman here on the San Jose Sharks, or I guess the sixth man here, and he just is not really good enough to be in the NHL at this point. And so the fact that the Sharks are stuck with him for 4 years is just honestly a mind-boggling move. The other defenseman who I do want to talk about, of course, is Erik Karlsson, who had some issues thus far in this game. Obviously, the one that really sticks out is his play on the William Karlsson goal, where he just gets beat completely by William Karlsson, dekes him out, goes past him, scores the goal, and that ended up being the game winner here tonight. But the thing is, when it comes to Erik Karlsson, we've seen him in the past few games really take over games offensively, and I've mentioned this many times in the past, you take the good with the bad. I'd much rather Erik Karlsson be what he has been in these past few games where you have those occasional massive defensive errors than what Karlsson was through the first 2-3 games of this season, where he wasn't making really too many defensive mishaps, but he also was doing literally nothing offensively because he wasn't actually taking any risks. So I think it's better for the San Jose Sharks if Karlsson does make those aggressive moves, and if it does sometimes end up in the back of their own net because he tries to step up when he's maybe not able to actually do so, you sort of take the punches there. And then finally, I'm actually going to talk about the goaltender here. James Reimer, of course, had a very solid game for the San Jose Sharks, I would say. Certainly kept them alive early on in this one. Didn't have that much of a chance, let's say, on the Karlsson goal. Didn't have any chance on the Mark Stone goal. He probably would have wanted the goal back from Shea Theodore. I imagine this was a shot from the point that was screened, but I don't think it was tipped, and it just went straight through the 5-hole. So it was an okay game for Reimer. He definitely kept the Sharks alive earlier on, and you could definitely say that the Sharks kind of let him down at the end, which is kind of also a theme here for the Sharks thus far this season. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday, where they will take on the Toronto Maple Leafs. So the Sharks will go from losing this game here tonight against a tough Vegas Golden Knights opponent to now a tough Toronto Maple Leafs opponent. So we'll see if it's going to be another loss in the cards. Class dismissed.